Hello and welcome to When I Stop Fighting, the podcast, hosted by Daryl Dittmer, where we talk about the fight or fights that so many of us engage in this lifetime, as well as ways to potentially relieve ourselves of those fights. Let's get started. Welcome to When I Stop Fighting, the podcast. My name is Daryl Dittmer. My guest today is Kyle Coyote Yates, creator and host of the Vibes Broadcast Network, as well as, near and dear to my heart, a sober human. Welcome, Coyote. Great to connect with you again.
Hey, man, thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's we definitely had a good connection when I was fortunate to be on your podcast, which we'll get into in a little bit here, but was just it was a cool conversation. You're just you're a cool guy. You're a chill guy. I love that sort of thing. And we had an easy, I thought, wonderful conversation. So wanted to get you on and kind of do it from this end and see where we go.
Appreciate that, man. It's different being on this side of the conversation,
Yeah, it is. It is. Somebody asked me the other day, I don't know if it was my wife or not, but she's like, which do you like better? Do you like being a guest or you like doing the podcast? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if it's one that I necessarily like better than the other. I think because I'm new doing it myself, or fairly new to doing it myself, I love that energy and I love how that plays and but I also, there's a little thing inside me. It's like, oh man, I hope I'm doing it right. Trying to make sure I'm asking whatever the most relevant questions and this and that. But whatever, it's like everything else in life. You get better as you go, and you morph and you change and right, we do the best we can. So from a sober human perspective, again, near and dear to my heart, and I think that's just a wonderful thing. And as you know, I am as well. And many of the guests that I have on have sobriety and are moving through their lives now in a sober fashion, which is cool. But and I think the most important thing that for me, what I can try to impart to people is my story, for whoever can relate to that. And I love to hear your story, Coyote, if you would. Just how did you find sobriety, and how did the whole journey start?
I think mine started like a lot of people's, where you kind of you succumb to peer pressure. I was about 12 years old, and I was trying to fit in. I was that odd kid that didn't have a lot of friends. And I'm trying to hang out with the cool kids, and always hung out with my cousins, which were older than me, and they were drinking and smoking weed and that kind of thing. So I thought, hey man, I'm gonna try this too. And it started out, maybe every other weekend, or maybe we'd have those consistent parties on the weekend. I'd start drinking a little bit, and I started out drinking rum, of all things, rum and Coke. That was my drink of choice. And then wine coolers got to be popular, so I was drinking that. Then I was hanging out with some other kids from school who wanted to start a band, and their parents bought them alcohol, but they drank beer. And I wasn't like that fond of it, but after you drink it for a while, then you get used to it, and then it's like nothing. And I wanted to try weed, so I had a cousin that had some, and man, I got that first. Well, strangely enough, the first time I smoked weed, nothing happened. What's the big deal here? I thought it was like cigarettes or something. The second time, I got so stoned off my butt, and I was like, wow, this is the coolest thing ever. And I'd start listening to Pink Floyd, and the Beatles and all that kind of thing. It was fun at first. And I don't know if maybe I had so many underlying problems that I wanted to drown them out that it turned into a habit. Then I got to where I had to have it. When I got married, I was a full-blown alcoholic, drug addict. And it started out with weed, and then I did crack and speed, and I could go through the list. And it just got worse and worse and worse until I met this guy who was an ex-bandito, and he invited me to church. I thought, man, if this guy can go to church, I can go to church. Still tatted up and tough looking, rode the Harley, the whole 9 yards. And I quit for a while. I even got into preaching, and my life was going good. And then I had a fallout with my preacher. Started having problems with my wife. Strange enough, you get in church, you think life between you and your spouse will get better. And then I rebelled. I quit going to church, got right back into drinking again, and it got worse. I had a cocaine habit like you wouldn't believe. And then I turned 36 and I had a heart attack. That's when I said, maybe I need to give this up. And I quit again. And I was going good. I went cold turkey. I left it all alone, exercised, ate right. I dropped like 60 pounds.
Wow.
And then my wife left me. And I'm out on my own, still was doing good. And I started dating, and I was with this one girl, and she liked to drink. And she was drinking this one night. She wouldn't stop, and I got kind of pissed off. And I took her drink away from her, and I made the mistake of chugging it. And I got right back into drinking again. Well, then it came time for custody, and I wanted my kids more than anything. And that's when I finally said, that's it. I'm done. And I've been sober ever since, man. And we're talking years now. Been 10 years, I think. Got remarried. My new wife, she has really got me back on a spiritual path. And then I think I talked to you about this when you were on my show, but I ended up developing a spinal disease. And along with that comes a lot of pain. Well, what's the first thing the doctors want to do? Throw pain pills at you.
Yep.
But I went to this one doctor and I told him, look, man, I'm an addict. If you start giving me opioids and that kind of stuff, I'm going to abuse it. He says, I got an answer for you, because it's not easy dealing with a lot of pain. Well, there's a pill called buprenorphine. Now, it does have an opioid type consistency to it, but it's like methadone. It's methadone in a pill. And I don't have an urge to get high or anything like that. And it's been a blessing. Well, when we talked before the show, I told you we moved back to my hometown to take care of our parents, and I had to get a new pain care physician. We got to talking. I was going to get a pain pump inserted into my spine. Well, that's got fentanyl in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to him the other day, and I'm like, look, if you put me on this, are you going to take me off the buprenorphine? He says, oh, yeah, we'll have to take you off of it. It's like, man, I would rather deal with the buprenorphine because it keeps me sober than to have this pump in my spine all the time. I can deal with a little pain here and there, but I can't deal with getting back to getting stoned again. So I'm leaning more towards not getting the pump at all.
Yeah.
And I've gotten a better relationship with my kids. I have a great relationship with my grandkids. And I love being sober. And, along that journey, trying to find something to do, I got into the podcasting, and that's one of the reasons why I had someone like you come on. Is I'm trying to bring some inspiration out there. People that have been through something. I've got a great support group around me, and I want to provide that to others that may not have it. So that's kind of been my journey along the way.
Yeah, that's great, man. I thank you for sharing your story, and so many things hit me about your story, but one of the things was, and there, early on, right, peer pressure and feeling like you want to be cool, feeling like you want to fit in, feeling like you want to be good enough, to hang with the cool kids, or whatever, quote unquote, right? The cool kids. And that was exactly, I could relate to that 100%, because there was something in me, something in this mechanism that just was not feeling adequate, was not feeling like I could hang with everybody else, or that I deserved to hang with everybody else. And it sounds like you felt the same way.
I mean, and it was the early 80s, and everybody was partying, and who wants to be the nerd? Oh, that guy doesn't want to drink. He doesn't want to smoke a joint. He's not cool. And that pressure, I don't know if that still goes on nowadays with kids, but it was pretty bad back then.
It was. Yeah, no, I remember, and I was definitely right in the midst of that. I graduated from high school in '84, so that was kind of like what we did. There wasn't anything else. We didn't go to movies. We didn't, whatever. Everything we did had to do with drinking or drugs, and as that escalates over time, it just gets ugly. There's no other way for it to go, and I look at it like, because there were friends over time that sort of, they dropped off, they were friends that were not feeling like I was feeling about myself, but then there were some that were, so those guys hung on, and then the other ones kind of dropped off. They're like, I don't need to do this to myself. And it wasn't something that they said. It was just all of a sudden they weren't there. They weren't in the same spots. They weren't in the same dens. They weren't in the same parties. Where the people who were, I guess, more adept at wanting to get that fix, whatever that happened to be. I mean, that's where we were. But it's amazing as I look back how the friends dropped off. Did you experience that same kind of thing?
And it's weird. The group that I hung out with mostly were heads, and the music, I guess, was a real driving factor. It was part of the culture, the party. Mm-hmm. And everybody I knew they just, even after we graduated, they still acted like we were in high school. Now, I have friends that are older than me that I've stopped hanging out with because they still think they're back in high school. I mean, you can't be in your 60s and still think you're 16 years old.
Right.
And so they're still doing that kind of stuff. But then a lot of them got smart and was like, hey, I need to care for my family, and they straightened up. And it's wild how many people that I had to basically excommunicate out of my life because they just won't stop.
Right. And that's hard to see. I actually received a Facebook message this morning from a guy who is in my book. I didn't use his real name, but he's in my book, and I had no idea what happened. I have no idea what happened to most of those people that were, in there in the early days and this and that. And he basically sent me a Facebook message, and this was just really touching to me. But he said, it's been really inspiring with your book and your podcast and what you're doing with sobriety. And I don't know exactly what it said, but something like he's been sober too. And that his life has completely changed and everything's, really cool. And and I don't know who else is. I mean, there might be other ones who are sober as well. And that's just a cool thing for me to see, because a lot of them aren't around anymore. They're not on this planet anymore. And then, this person coming out of the woodwork and like, hey, I'm sober too. I was like, oh man, like it just hits me right here. Right. It's awesome to see that.
What blew my mind was how many of those guys that I partied with were dying off in their 40s. And I mean, you don't really hold on to those same friends, once you get married and have kids. So I don't know a whole lot of them that do. I did have a few that eventually I had to say, hey, enough's enough. But you know that I interview some musicians from back in those days, back from those bands that we used to listen to, Quiet Riot and all that. Which shocked me. I had Rudy Sarzo on from Quiet Riot, and he stayed sober. He never partied and all that kind of stuff. That was shocking to me. In fact, he's Christian. Talked to JJ French, the lead guitarist from Twisted Sister, and he had sold drugs at one time, but he's got straight sober and stayed sober the whole time he's with Twisted Sister. In fact, if you were in the band, you were going to party, they were going to get rid of you. And I asked him, I said, don't you think it would have been probably beneficial to let your fans know that you didn't party, and maybe that would have changed some lives? He says, our management said, don't tell people that you don't party. We want them to think that you do, because that's the cool thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a few that I talked to that, hey, we partied and did all this, and then I realized that I was killing myself, or I was losing my friends, and so I got sober. So you just had such a different array of people, how either they were always sober or they got sober, and then you have some that just can't let go.
I used to, I don't know when it was, a year and some change ago, maybe. We saw Ted Nugent in Texas, in Beaumont.
Okay.
Beaumont, Texas. One of his last shows, and or I guess one of his last sort of tours, I suppose. But he had said, and he I think he says it wholeheartedly, like, I've never done this stuff. I've never drank, smoked, didn't care, like that sort of thing. And I find it fascinating that there are people like that on this planet. Now my wife, for the most part, she drank a little, but never tried anything else. Those people just don't make any sense to me. Like, what's wrong? Well, like, why don't you? Or why didn't you? I thought everybody did it, but they don't. And I think that's a really cool thing. And it's an interesting thing, especially for people like us, right? Because it's hard to get. It's hard to understand, like, oh, you never really felt like you wanted to feel differently about life. And because that was my whole thing. I needed to feel differently than how I felt.
When I was at school, I looked around, I go, oh yeah, everybody's doing this. I don't want to be the odd man out. And I was shocked to find that, the crowd that I didn't normally hang out with, there was a lot of them that they just didn't do that. And you thought, you were so cool back in high school. You didn't party? No, didn't party.
Amazing. That's amazing. Yeah. So So you had mentioned, going to church and getting sober at different periods, for periods of time, and so was there any? What was the difference, around the time when your kids, when you were sort of doing that whole battle and made that decision? What was the difference that has made that stick, now, and through this last 10 years or so?
Well, I look back at the hell that I put my kids through when they were little, because I was full blown alcoholic then. And then when my first wife and I split up, we went into a custody battle. My first wife, she was crazy. I mean, I know everybody says that about their ex, but she was actually bipolar, and
Mhm.
she had done some things I'm not going to talk about here, but it came down to they were taking my kids away from her, and they put them with me. And then there was kind of a resistance there because my kids didn't want to be around that alcoholic dad. And I was like, I've got to be mature here. I've got to be a father. And I saw how at least with my boys stayed with me. My daughter ended up moving in with my mom. But I saw our relationship start to get closer. And then, they're in their 20s, and my daughter gets married. She has a couple of boys, and she finally sees that dad is really changed. And I don't want to go backwards. I don't want to lose that, and I definitely don't want to lose that relationship with my grandkids. My grandkids have not seen drunk grandpa. I want to keep it that way. I don't want them to know what I was like back then. I want them to know me as I am now. And, because if you go back to being that same old, and you're like, oh, I ain't hanging around with that drunk. So I have to say that my kids and my grandkids are what's keeping me there.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's what better reason, right? What there's just, that's right here in the middle of us, right? There's not, you can't take that out. You can't change it. You can't move it. There's that. I'm actually fortunate. I'm going to say it's been a month, maybe 6 weeks. I don't know. I'm not good at dates or whatever, but we have a grandbaby in Austin, Texas, my first one. And so it's just a beautiful thing, right? It's just an absolutely beautiful thing. And to watch that happen and to be present for it and to be available for it and to be, able to give something of myself. And you mentioned a little bit earlier, in terms of your podcast and wanting to give back and wanting to, pump some good things into the world. And I'm 100% with you. I could not agree more with, we need that. We need that as individuals. We need it as communities and country and everything else. We need to help shape things at their roots. And the roots is the people, right? The roots is human beings and helping people. If there's something that we talk about that helps someone, then we've done our job, right? I mean, that's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, and let's face it, the things that we talk about are not the most popular on YouTube or any platform.
Yeah.
Most of it's either pop culture, video games, or politics. And you can, if you want to just go make money, then you talk about those things, go make money. But I just feel like there's enough of that out there, but there's not enough positivity going on. And I don't always talk about sobriety. I mean, sometimes it's health issues. Maybe you want to lose weight, or maybe you have a chronic disease and you don't know where to turn. I find people that are going through that or have gone through that, and they can talk about it. Shoot, maybe you want to write your own book. I have people that come on and talk about that. Maybe when I have a musician come on, or an actor, they come on and they talk about their projects and stuff. Well, there's somebody out there that's like, oh, well, maybe I want to do that. Or one of the questions I like to ask them is, what has been the greatest hurdle in your life? And some kid might be listening in and they talk about, oh man, I had to go through this, and go, wow, I'm going through that, or I went through that, and they came out good on the other side. That's an inspiration. So that's why my topics are kind of all over the place, but they still have a common theme, is inspiration and motivation.
Yeah, very cool. And it's everybody can use that, right? There's so much, in my opinion, that we're comes at us from all angles, and news and information and social media and everything, and it's helpful to have a respite from that. It's helpful to have a real discussion about real life and what's going on, and like you said, your hurdles, people's hurdles, to talk about that, because everybody has hurdles, and one of the things that I think is really prevalent in the world today, and I'm not, it's not like this big judgmental platform or anything, because we're all contributing to everything as well, but it's amazing how there's this emphasis on trying to look maybe different than what we are, trying to act like we feel better than we feel. There's a part of it that's just not real, and it's not honest, and it's not on the ground. Do you feel that way, or is that what you see as well?
Well, there is kind of a mask out there, and we did that. Everything is like a corporation. They're trying to sell something. I mentioned JJ French. Okay, here's a band, Twisted Sister. They're crazy looking, all over the place, and you think Wild Party. Well, they're made to look like that, and that gives people this idea of, like I had, was, oh man, I got to be crazy and party like these guys. But yet I get to the human side of, here's this guitar player that, okay, we all know you were in Twisted Sister, we all know about the music and this, that, and the other, but let's get a little deeper into who you really are. That's what I want to talk about. That's why I don't ask them those same 100 questions that you hear on every interview. And then you find out he's just a regular guy. There's more to him than that, wild makeup and long hair and crazy songs. This guy he's a businessman. He was, just talking to him inspires me. And I know that there's somebody out there that's going to hear that. They forget the mask, put that away. Let's get to who you really are. That's why I feel like my shows are different than what you usually see. And I'm patting myself a little bit on the back here, but when I get through with an interview, nearly every one of them have told me, and nobody has ever asked me those questions before.
That's really cool. Yeah, that's really cool, man. I'm there's that veneer, right? The veneer that we sort of hold up and say, oh, this is me, and not all of us, but a lot of people do that. And then there's okay, if I take that away, and then what's left, it's just people, you know, and like you're talking about JJ French, he's just a dude, right? He's a guy. And the interesting thing is, and I think where this can get lost sometimes, is everybody's got, and I look at sobriety from this perspective too, and recovery and that sort of thing, but everybody's where we meet, the ground where we meet is on our emotions. You know, we have different stories, and I was, you know, I did this but I didn't do this, and I did this but I didn't do this, and you did this but you didn't do this, and our stories as far as what's going on out in the world aren't necessarily the same, but we all connect on the playing field of emotions, and we all feel the fear, and we all feel the pains, and we all feel the, you know, the scared to death, and we feel the anger, and we feel the love, and so we meet on that playing field. And I think it's sometimes we get lost in looking at people and maybe putting them on a pedestal and saying, well, you're not supposed to feel all those things because you're X. You know, I don't think about the fact that other people, everybody feels those things. Everybody's got stuff to deal with. Everybody's got their, you know, their elephant in the room in terms of something they need to contend with. And I think that's a cool place to start our interactions with humans. And it sounds like on the Vibes Broadcast Network, that's exactly what you do.
I want to get to that human side. I still remember when I first picked up a Quiet Riot album, and I'm looking at the picture of these guys, and I see Rudy Sarzo, and he looks tough. He looks kind of mean. I get him on the show, and I find out he's just a family guy. It's just an act he puts on stage of the, you know, this crazy looking dude, and he's very deep in his faith. He talked about how his family, their struggle from coming from Cuba here to the United States and, you know, becoming citizens of the United States. It's very heartwarming to hear his story. And at the end of it, we ended up exchanging phone numbers, and he come to Houston a couple months ago and met up with him, and it was kind of cool sitting at the side of the stage and watching him play and enjoying it. But I don't look at him the same when I see him on stage. I say, hey, that's my buddy. You know, he's just a normal guy. Believe it or not, a lot of them, they just want to be treated like a normal human being too. They don't put themselves on that pedestal. I think their fans do.
Right, 100%. I couldn't agree with that more. I think there's, you know, we create that separation by what we think and by what we expect, and our vision of somebody who's world famous, or, you know, like those kind of things. We take the human part away from them, and once you peel off that everything else, they're just people, you know. And I learned this in business a long time ago, because I come from a real blue collar background, and then I got involved in business through a circuitous, you know, just sort of an interesting story. But I used to be scared to death of people, you know, vice presidents and presidents and CEOs and this and that. And then at one point I'm like, I can't be scared of these people, because they're, you know, just because it's not where I came from. I didn't come from that, you know, I didn't come from that background. And I finally told myself, you don't need to be scared to death. They're just people, you know, they're just human beings, and very simple, or very similar to your, you know, to your experiences. Once you kind of cut through that, you find that out. And that's a very freeing thing for me, because everybody goes on the same playing field at that point, you know, which is pretty cool. I don't have to have you know, these heroes that are out there that aren't real humans. So anyway, that's I know we're running a little short on time, but I'm glad we we talked about that. I think that was really, really cool. So if you were going to give somebody advice, maybe somebody's who's listening is just getting sober, or they're looking to get sober, or they are early on in sobriety and they're facing those hurdles and they're struggling, what would be the advice that you would give them?
Well, first off, it's because of what I went through. Find what means the most to you and use that as an inspiration. What I mean by that is, for me, it was my kids and my grandkids. And when you get that urge to drink, have their picture nearby and look at them and say, do I want them to see me the way I am when I'm drunk, or when I'm sober, or when I'm high, or when I'm sober? Because there was a time that I didn't care if I lived or died. But that changed when I think of, if I wasn't here tomorrow, and my youngest grandson lives with us, and he always, first thing he does when he wakes up is he comes in here to the studio and to see what Pawpaw's doing. And I wonder, how would he feel if I wasn't here tomorrow when he wakes up? And that changes your mindset. Does the drink or the drugs, does that mean more to you, or does that child mean more to you? Maybe there's a person out there that you feel strongly about. I can't speak for you, but find out who that is. Or maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's your career. Maybe if your career means a lot to you, do you want to have that career, or you want to be a drunk? Because I know a lot of people that are living on the street because that became more important to them than family or career. So kind of, I don't know, that's my way of looking at it anyway.
No, I appreciate it. That's great. There's a lot of ways, and I've met a lot of people over the years that I've been sober, and they get sober in different ways, and they stay sober for whatever reasons, and they whatever works. I mean, and that's what it is. I mean, I value the humans in my life so much now that there is absolutely no way that there would be anything that I would do to undermine that, especially something that I would do to myself that would compromise me with them in our relationships. It's and that's incredibly important. So I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So as we wrap it up here, I want to let everybody know where to find you and your work, and I'll put this stuff in the show notes as well. But if you could share that, would be great, Coyote.
Well, I'm on YouTube. It's the Vibes Broadcast. I don't remember if it's under the Vibes Broadcast or Vibes Broadcast Network, but I'm on YouTube. I'm on Rumble, Odyssey, and the audio portion you can find on Buzzsprout. Buzzsprout's a great launching pad. It sends it out to iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, just about anywhere you listen to a podcast, you could find us.
Very cool. Yeah, that sounds great. Well, I love doing your podcast and being on your podcast, and I so much appreciate you jumping on with me and sharing, your thoughts and your wisdom and your experiences, which, are very cool for each of us, individually. They're so different and they're so unique, and it takes all of us. So thanks, Coyote. Appreciate having you on, man. And we'll talk real soon.
All right. Thank you, brother. I appreciate you having me on.
My pleasure.